TidJit Podcast Episode 9. Hello everyone. Today we will take you on a deep dive into the world of It Tidjit, a discipline that is not just a belief, but the science of using sound frequencies to hack your mind-body balance. We are shifting from having to fight or submit to simply standing strong through understanding your own inner mechanisms. I am Rewat Bunyaratapan, or Ray YARATA, creator of the It Tidjit system, producer of the album Human Pulsecore, music to dissolve negative energy in the mind, and the album Mantra Frequencies, music to replenish the mind. Let's dive into the data.
Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I have a question for you to start things off today, and I want you to be totally honest. When I say the words mind training, what is the very first image that pops into your head?
I think for most people it's probably pretty standard. You picture someone sitting cross-legged on a cushion, maybe eyes closed,
Right.
total silence, maybe a little incense burning in the corner.
Exactly. It's very aesthetic, it's quiet, it's usually a solitary thing. But what if I told you that effective mind training could look, or rather sound, completely different?
Like not sitting in silence.
Right. What if instead of just sitting in a quiet room hoping for enlightenment, we were actually talking about applied physics, like sound waves, specific frequencies?
I mean, that definitely changes the picture. It takes it from, a spiritual retreat to something that feels a lot more like a laboratory.
Yeah, it really does. And today we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating subject called ItthiJit. Now, before you tune out thinking this is just another mindfulness app review, stick with us.
Yeah, this isn't your standard self-help book summary.
Not at all. We are looking at a specific intersection where spiritual practice basically crashes right into scientific principle.
And it is a collision that produces some really interesting and arguably controversial ideas about how we actually function as human beings.
The source material we're working with today is titled Ep.9 Core Message, and it outlines a methodology that essentially claims to use audio to hack the operating system of the mind.
Hack is definitely a strong word, but after reading through this material, it feels pretty appropriate.
It really does.
Yeah.
So the mission for this deep dive is to understand how sound waves and specific frequencies are being used as tools. And not just to relax. We aren't talking about, whale sounds to help you sleep.
Right, this is about actually building mental strength and equilibrium. It's a system of mind power or psychic training, but one that grounds itself really heavily in the mechanics of wave physics.
And I have to say, looking through this source material, the terminology just completely threw me for a loop.
Yeah, it's very specific.
We've got phrases like human pulse core and mantra frequencies. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel or a techno thriller.
It does, but it's presented as a very practical manual for living. The specificity of those terms really matters.
Right.
But before we get to the sci-fi sounding technology or the how of it all, we really have to understand the why. Because if you don't buy into the problem that ItthiJit is trying to solve, the solution just isn't going to make any sense.
Okay, so let's unpack the philosophy first.
Okay.
Because the source starts with a pretty heavy statement about the human condition.
It really does. It begins by establishing the fundamental problem we all face. The text states that as long as the mind is not separated from the body, you have a duty.
A duty.
Yes. And that duty is to create balance for your life, constantly.
As long as the mind is not separated from the body, that is a very polite, almost clinical way of saying, well, as long as you're alive.
Precisely. It implies that being in a physical body comes with a maintenance requirement. I think we tend to view mental balance as a luxury.
Yeah, like something you do on the weekend. Or when you finally retire.
Exactly. But the source argues it's a duty. It's basically the rent you pay for inhabiting a body.
But here's where it gets really relatable for anyone listening. The source frames this struggle for balance by looking at the extremes. It sets up this dichotomy of how people usually try to get through life. It says we usually pick one of two lanes.
Right, and lane one is the person who only yields.
Okay, so let's talk about the yielder. Because on the surface, this actually sounds like a nice person. Cooperative, easygoing.
And that's exactly the trap.
Yeah.
We are so socially conditioned to think yielding is a virtue. But the source takes a very different view on this. It describes this not as kindness, but as a structural failure.
So we aren't talking about just being polite. We're talking about the yes man, the doormat.
Think about the biological response here. This is the fawn response in trauma. It's the person who gives in to absolutely everything just to avoid conflict.
Like, sure, I'll do that extra work even though I'm completely drowning.
Right. Or, no problem, treat me however you want, just don't be mad at me.
And the source is pretty harsh on this approach, isn't it?
It is brutal. The text explicitly says that being a person who only yields, who only ever gives in, will lead to suffering and a total loss of balance. It views passivity as a literal leak in your equilibrium.
Wow.
Yeah, if you just absorb everything the world throws at you, other people's stress, their demands, their noise, you eventually just sink. You cannot build a stable self if your walls are made of sponge.
That definitely hits home. I think we've all been there to some degree. You think you're keeping the peace, but you're actually destroying your own peace in the process.
Exactly.
But then there's the other side of the coin. Because if yielding is bad, surely the answer is to be strong, right? To fight back.
Well, this brings us to scenario B, the person who only fights.
The aggressor, the whole grind set mentality, the person who thinks life is just a battle to be won and everything is a competition.
We see this everywhere in modern culture.
Yeah.
Crush it. Dominate your day.
Rise and grind.
Right. But the source argues that being a person who only fights does not guarantee happiness either. And that is a crucial distinction. We so often think if we just fight hard enough, we will eventually win the prize of happiness.
Like happiness is just the trophy waiting for you at the end of the war.
Exactly. But the source suggests that the fighting itself disrupts the balance just as much as yielding does. Being in a constant state of defense, of aggression, of always pushing back, that is exhausting.
I can imagine it's a high cortisol existence.
It really is. You might look like you're winning on the outside, but you aren't balanced. You're rigid. And things that are rigid tend to break, they don't bend.
So we're kind of stuck then. If yielding equals suffering because you just get crushed, and fighting doesn't equal happiness because you eventually burn out, what is left?
The third path. And this is the core definition in ItthiJit.
The source gives a definition of true happiness that I actually found really refreshing. It says, true happiness is the art of creating balance.
I really want you to focus on the word art there, because it implies skill. It implies nuance. It's not a static state. You don't just achieve balance once and then sit there forever like a statue.
It's like riding a bike. You aren't static. You're constantly making these tiny micro adjustments just to stay upright. If you stop moving or stop adjusting, you fall over.
That is a perfect analogy. And this connects directly back to your daily life.
Yeah.
Think about your average Tuesday.
Yeah.
You're constantly torn between pushing too hard, fighting against a deadline, fighting traffic, fighting to get your opinion heard, or being too passive, letting emails pile up, letting people cross your boundaries.
And ItthiJit is suggesting that the whole goal is to find that center point.
Right. The source defines this path as a way to create balance for the body and mind so that you are strong enough to stand on your own feet.
Stand on your own feet. It sounds very independent.
It is independent.
Yeah.
But there's an ethical guardrail attached to it, which is important. The text says the goal is to stand on your own feet without harming yourself and without causing trouble for others.
That is the key difference between balance and just being selfish. It's strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance.
Precisely. It's a self-contained strength.
Right.
You aren't leaning on others, which would be yielding, and you aren't pushing others down, which is fighting. You're just vertical.
Okay, so philosophically, I am totally sold. We need balance. We don't want to be a doormat, and we don't want to be a bully. But this is usually where self-help advice just completely falls apart for me.
Oh, how so?
People tell you to find balance, and then they just leave you to figure it out yourself. Usually that involves being told to take a bubble bath or go on a vacation you can't afford.
Right, just relax. It's
Yeah.
pretty useless advice.
Exactly. But ItthiJit takes a really sharp left turn here. It moves completely away from psychology and goes straight into physics.
Yes. This is the methodology part of our deep dive. The source states that ItthiJit isn't just a philosophy. It actually utilizes the science of sound waves as its primary tool.
It asserts that we can use the principles of physics, specifically sound, as an instrument to literally arrange or organize the mind. Now, are we talking about music here, like listening to Mozart to get smarter?
It's way more complex than that. The source describes preparing music for mind training. This is highly engineered audio. You should think of it less like a symphony and much more like a prescription.
A prescription for what, exactly?
For resonance. We know from physics that sound waves can actually move matter. If you play the exact right frequency, you can shatter a wine glass, you can levitate small particles, you can literally shake a bridge.
Right, acoustic resonance.
Well, the human body and the human brain are matter. We are physical structures. The premise here is that if your mind is an instrument that has gone completely out of tune because of all that fighting and yielding, you can't just think it back into tune.
You can't just wish it better.
No, you need an external force to calibrate it.
So it's sort of like using a tuning fork. You strike the fork, bring it near the guitar string, and the string just naturally starts to vibrate in sympathy.
That's it, exactly. And what I love about this is that it depersonalizes the struggle. Instead of saying, oh, I'm broken, I need to fix my personality, you're just saying, my frequency is off, I need to retune.
It becomes a physics problem, not a character flaw.
Exactly.
I really love that. It takes all the guilt out of it. But let's get into the actual nuts and bolts, or I guess the waves and frequencies.
Let's do it.
The source mentions two very specific, very unusual technical terms that act as the primary mechanisms for this training.
Yes, let's tackle the jargon. Because if you just read these words on the page, they sound completely baffling.
The first one is human Pulsecore.
Human Pulsecore.
Yeah. The source talks about music that, quote, dissolves human Pulsecore. Now, I have to play the skeptic for a second here. I checked a biology textbook. I checked Gray's Anatomy. There is absolutely no organ in the body called the Pulsecore. What are we actually looking at here?
You're right. You are definitely not going to find it in a medical diagram. But if you look at the words themselves, pulse implies rhythm, life, the beating heart. Core implies the center, your foundation.
Okay.
But in this context, the source explicitly says it needs to be dissolved.
Dissolved usually implies getting rid of something unwanted, like a blockage in a pipe
Right.
or a kidney stone.
That's a great way to look at it. So, in the context of mind training, human Pulsecore likely represents the accumulated density of all our stress and conditioning. Think of it as emotional plaque.
Emotional plaque.
Yeah, the rigid patterns, the unhealed trauma, the knee-jerk reactions that have just calcified in our center over years and years of fighting and yielding.
So if I'm the person who has been fighting all day, my Pulsecore is that tight knot in my chest, that heavy feeling that just won't go away.
Yes, and it's dense. You can't just wish that away with positive thinking. The force claims that these specific sound waves are engineered to physically vibrate that density until it breaks up.
Like an ultrasonic cleaner for jewelry, you put the dirty ring in, the water vibrates at a super high frequency, and the dirt just literally shakes right off.
That is a fantastic image for it. Dissolving human Pulsecore is essentially ultrasonic cleaning for the psyche.
Okay, so that's the removal process. But you can't just leave a vacuum, right? If you shake out all the old bad habits, you just have an empty space.
And nature abhors a vacuum. Which brings us perfectly to the second technical term, mantra frequencies.
Mantra frequencies. The source speaks of music that fills or replenishes the mind with these. Now, when I hear the word mantra, I instantly think of chanting. Words, like someone saying Om or repeating I am strong.
Usually, yes. A traditional mantra is a semantic tool, a word or phrase you repeat. But notice the pairing here, mantra frequencies. The source implies that the power isn't in the meaning of the word itself, but in the actual physical vibration of the sound.
So it's not about intellectually repeating a positive phrase to yourself, it's about physically exposing your mind to a specific pitch or tone.
Correct. It suggests that certain frequencies act essentially as nutrients. If human Pulsecore is the waste we need to remove, mantra frequencies are the vitamins we need to absorb.
So the mechanism is this continuous two-step cycle. You dissolve the bad stuff, the density, the Pulsecore, and then you fill up with the good stuff, the mantra frequencies.
Dissolve and fill. It sounds really simple, but it's a constant, ongoing process. Just like you have to constantly clean your house and go buy new groceries. You don't just do it once and you're finished forever.
Now, this brings us to a detail in the source that I found really interesting. And frankly, it's where a lot of people might roll their eyes if they don't quite understand the tech behind it. The source is incredibly specific about the file format you use to listen to this audio.
Ah, you're talking about the requirement for .wav files.
Yes. The source explicitly says you need full-frequency audio, and it specifically mentions .wav files. It actively warns against using standard formats. Now, for the listener who just streams everything on Spotify or listens to MP3s while they run, does this actually matter, or is this just pure audio snobbery?
Oh, it matters. This is massive. If you miss this point, you miss the entire science aspect of ItthiJit. We really have to talk about what an MP3 actually is to understand why.
Okay, enlighten us. Why is the MP3 the villain in this scenario?
So an MP3 is a compressed file format. To make the file size small enough to stream quickly over the internet, the computer uses an algorithm to cut out data. But it doesn't just cut randomly.
Right.
It uses something called psychoacoustics. It actively removes sounds and frequencies that the human ear consciously doesn't hear or prioritize.
So it's kind of like taking a really high-definition photo and blurring the background because the algorithm assumes you aren't looking at the trees anyway.
Exactly. It throws away all the non-essential information.
Yeah.
But here's the major problem. In the context of ItthiJit, the medicine is often in those exact frequencies that an MP3 algorithm considers non-essential.
Oh, I see exactly where this is going. If the whole goal is to vibrate a specific part of the mind or to dissolve that deep Pulsecore.
And the frequency required to do that happens to be in the very high or very low range or hidden in the subtle harmonics that the MP3 codec just decides to delete, then you are literally listening to a placebo. You have removed the active ingredient entirely.
That makes total sense. It's like buying a bottle of vitamin C, but someone went in and removed all the actual vitamin C to make the bottle lighter to ship. You're swallowing the pill, but you aren't getting any of the benefit.
Precisely. The source emphasizes full frequency, because the effect isn't just about consciously enjoying a nice melody, it's about the physical impact of the actual data contained within the sound wave. You need the full packet of acoustic information to get the intended effect.
So no low-quality YouTube streams for this mind training. If you want the physics to actually work, you need the raw, uncompressed file.
The source is very clear on this. It's .wav or nothing, essentially. It implies that to get the full benefit of the science of sound, high fidelity is a strict requirement, not just a luxury for audiophiles.
Okay, so we have the philosophy of finding balance, the mechanism of dissolving and filling, and the technical requirement of high-fidelity audio. The next logical question has to be, where does this actually come from? Who is making these specific soundscapes?
The source links this specific methodology directly to a creator named YARATA.
YARATA.
And in terms of availability, it seems this is a very modern, digitally distributed system. The source directs people to search for YARATA Ko-Fi.
Ko-Fi being that digital platform where creators can share content and get support from fans, I actually really like that. It's very accessible. You don't have to go hike up a mountain to some remote monastery to find the secret healing frequency.
No.
You just need a solid internet connection and apparently a really good pair of headphones.
It fits the whole theme, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Using modern tools for ancient problems. We are taking digital distribution and wave physics to try and solve the core problem of human suffering.
It really does fit perfectly. So let's zoom out a bit here. We started this deep dive with this idea of mind training being quiet and still and passive, but we've ended up with a very dynamic, active process involving literal sound engineering. What is the big takeaway for you here?
I think the journey we took through the source material is really telling. We moved from the philosophical need for balance, that constant tension between fighting and yielding, to the realization that willpower alone might not actually be enough.
Yeah, just telling someone find balance is about as useful as telling someone just fly. It doesn't give them a method.
Exactly. We usually fail at finding balance because the Pulsecore, that accumulated stress, that heavy density, is just too heavy to lift with our thoughts. ItthiJit offers a practical tool.
Right.
It acknowledges that we are physical beings, deeply affected by physics. It basically says, don't just think harder, use the right tool to physically change your state.
And the core message really sticks with me. You have a duty to create balance for yourself. It totally reframes the whole concept of self-care. It's not selfish to take time to tune your mind. It's responsible.
Because if you aren't balanced, you are either collapsing on the people around you, which is yielding, or you're crashing into them, which is fighting.
And that definition of happiness, not as winning, not as giving up, but as the art of balance, that is a really powerful reframe. It makes the goal feel attainable. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep adjusting.
It really is. It definitely makes me look at my daily playlist a little differently. It makes me wonder what I'm feeding my brain through my ears every single day.
It should. And actually, that leads right into a thought that has been lingering for me throughout this whole deep dive.
What's that?
Well, if we fully accept the premise of the source, that sound waves can literally dissolve parts of our mental state and fill others, that specific frequencies can heal our balance.
Yeah.
It raises a pretty provocative question about our modern environment. If sound can heal us, can sound also harm us? How much of our daily emotional imbalance, our anxiety, our stress, our brain fog is being dictated simply by the noise environment we currently live in?
Whoa, you mean like the constant hum of the city?
Think about it. The refrigerator hum, the traffic outside, the construction down the street, the compressed, tinny audio we blast from our phones all day, the constant barrage of notification pings. If sound is quite literally a diet for the mind, are we basically eating junk food all day without even realizing it?
That is slightly terrifying to think about.
Or empowering? Because once you realize the noise is affecting you physically, you can choose to change the channel. You can actively choose to introduce those mantra frequencies.
That is a great place to leave it. We so often watch what we eat, but maybe it's time we really started watching what we hear.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think I'm going to go find some high-quality silence or maybe some full-frequency WAV audio and try to dissolve some of this week's stress.
Sounds like a perfect plan to me.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into ItthiJit. We hope you found some signal in the noise today. Until next time, go find your own art of balance.
Take care, everyone.
Ultimately, It Tidjit is not about rejecting existing beliefs, but rather a scientific tool to help repair our hardware, preparing it for the spiritual journey. If you are interested in high-quality audio files for mind training, both the album Human Pulsecore, Music to Dissolve Negative Energy in the Mind, and the album Mantra Frequencies, Music to Replenish the Mind, available in full-spectrum.wave format, please search Google YARATA Ko-fi as shown on the screen. That's all for today. Goodbye.